The night was cold, with snowflakes falling gently outside the grand Harrington mansion. The world outside was a quiet winter wonderland, but inside, the house felt empty despite its lavish decorations. A massive Christmas tree stood in the center of the living room, draped with golden ornaments and twinkling lights, but there was no one to admire it. William Harrington sat alone in his study, the faint crackling of the fire doing little to warm the icy chill in his chest. He swirled a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the amber liquid as though it held answers. William was a man who had everything money could buy: an empire built on his relentless ambition, properties across the globe, and a bank account that could fund generations. But none of it mattered tonight. The holidays, once filled with laughter and love, had turned into a painful reminder of what he had lost. His ex-wife had long since moved on, and his daughter, Emily, had vanished from his life years ago under circumstances too painful to recount. He hadn't seen or spoken to her in over a decade, and the ache of that absence was something he refused to acknowledge, burying it under work and luxury. A sharp knock echoed through the vast halls, pulling him from his thoughts. Frowning, he glanced at the clock on the mantel. It was nearly midnight. Who would dare disturb him on Christmas Eve? With a sigh of irritation, he rose, his footsteps echoing across the marble floors as he made his way to the front door. Swinging it open, he was met with a sight that caught him off guard. A small girl, no older than 7 or 8, stood on his doorstep. Her hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt, and her thin jacket was hardly adequate against the biting cold. She clutched a bundle of rags to her chest and looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes. "Please, sir," she said in a trembling voice. "I'm hungry. Do you have any food?" William stiffened, his lips pressing into a hard line. He had no patience for intrusions, let alone from strangers. "This is private property," he said curtly. "You shouldn't be here." The girl's face fell, and her voice wavered. "It's Christmas. I just thought." "Christmas or not, you can't beg at my door," he interrupted sharply. "Go away." For a moment, she lingered, her small frame shivering in the icy wind. Then, without another word, she turned and trudged back down the driveway, her steps slow and defeated. William shut the door firmly, muttering under his breath as he returned to his study. He tried to put the incident out of his mind, but the image of her face, so pale and fragile, lingered. Morning arrived, bringing with it the brightness of a clear winter day. The snow-covered grounds sparkled under the sunlight, but William's mood remained as cold as the frost outside. His longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, was bustling about the foyer when she called out to him. "Mr. Harrington, you might want to see this." He found her standing near the front door, holding a small object in her hand. "What is it?" he asked impatiently. "This was on the doorstep," she said, handing it to him. It was a delicate silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a heart. On closer inspection, he saw an engraving on the back. His breath caught. "Emily," it read, in the same elegant script he remembered from the personalized necklace he'd given his daughter on her 3rd birthday. The very necklace she'd been wearing the last time he saw her. William stared at the pendant, a strange tightness gripping his chest. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. "It must have been that poor girl from last night," Mrs. Whitaker said. "She was the only one who came to the door." The realization hit him like a blow. Could it be possible? Could the girl somehow be connected to Emily? The thought seemed absurd, and yet the evidence was in his hand. 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Who was she? How did she come to possess this necklace? And if there was any truth to the connection, where had Emily been all these years? Pacing the room, William struggled with a decision. His instincts told him to let it go. He'd built a life on controlling every aspect of his world, and chasing after ghosts was not his way. But this was different. It wasn't just some relic of the past. It was a piece of Emily, a tangible link to the daughter he had failed. "Mr. Harrington?" Mrs. Whitaker's voice broke through his thoughts. "What would you like me to do?" He looked at her, his expression hardening. "Find out everything you can about that girl. I want to know who she is and where she came from." For the first time in years, William felt a stirring of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, fear, maybe even regret. He didn't know what he would uncover, but one thing was certain. The girl's presence on his doorstep was no coincidence. It was the beginning of something far bigger than he could have imagined. The investigation began the very next day. William's trusted private investigator, a no-nonsense man named Carter, arrived promptly, carrying a small notebook and an air of quiet determination. William handed him the pendant without much explanation, simply stating that he wanted every detail about the girl and how she had come to possess it. Carter nodded. "I'll need a few days, Mr. Harrington, but I'll find her." The next few days passed in a haze of restless anticipation. William tried to immerse himself in work, burying himself in business calls and reports, but his mind kept returning to the little girl's face, her wide, frightened eyes, and the faint hope in her voice when she asked for food. He hadn't felt this unsettled in years, and he didn't like it. Yet, deep down, he knew he had to see this through. 3 days later, Carter returned, his expression grim but focused. He laid a folder on William's desk and began to speak. "Her name is Rosie," Carter said. "She's 8 years old, though she looks younger due to malnourishment. No known parents in the system. She's been living on the streets for the past 6 months, moving between shelters and abandoned buildings. I found her staying at a community center run by a woman named Martha Kent, who seems to have taken a liking to her." William's hand tightened around the edge of his desk. "And the necklace?" "That's the interesting part," Carter continued. "Martha says the girl's mother gave it to her before she passed away 2 years ago. The mother's name was Emily." William felt the air leave his lungs. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Did you confirm this?" "Martha showed me a photo of Rosie with her mother." "It's your daughter, Mr. Harrington." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. William turned back to Carter, his voice quieter now. "Where is she?" "At the community center. I can take you there." The drive felt interminable, though it was only across town. The farther they went from his gated estate, the grittier the surroundings became. Snow covered the cracked sidewalks, and the buildings grew older, their exteriors worn and unkempt. When they arrived, William saw a modest brick structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Hope Haven." Inside, it was warm but sparsely furnished, with mismatched chairs and tables scattered about. Children laughed and played in one corner, while a few adults prepared meals in the kitchen. Martha Kent approached him, her sharp eyes appraising him before she spoke. "You must be William Harrington." "I am," he replied, his voice clipped. "Where is Rosie?" Martha crossed her arms. "She's not a stray you can just pick up, Mr. Harrington. She's been through enough." "I'm her grandfather," he said, the words feeling foreign but oddly right. "I need to see her." Martha studied him for a long moment before nodding. "She's in the playroom. But don't expect her to trust you right away." William followed her down a short hallway, his heart pounding in a way that felt entirely unfamiliar. When they entered the room, he spotted Rosie immediately. She was sitting on the floor, coloring on a piece of paper, her small frame hunched over in concentration. She looked even smaller than he remembered, her clothes hanging off her thin body. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened, and she scrambled to her feet. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "I came to see you," he said simply. "I need to talk to you." Rosie's gaze flicked to Martha, who gave her a reassuring nod. Slowly, Rosie sat back down, though her posture remained tense. William sat across from her, unsure of where to begin. He'd spent his life commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar deals, but this tiny girl left him at a loss for words. Finally, he held out the necklace. "You dropped this at my house," he said. Her eyes darted to the pendant, then back to him. "It's mine," she said defensively. "My mom gave it to me." "I know," he said softly. "Your mom was my daughter." Rosie stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You're lying." "I'm not," he said, his voice steady. "I gave this necklace to Emily when she was your age. She was my little girl, just like you're hers." For a moment, Rosie said nothing. Then she snatched the necklace from his hand, clutching it tightly. "If you were her dad, why weren't you with her? Why did she have to die?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I made mistakes, he admitted. Big ones. Emily and I didn't part on good terms, and I've regretted it every day since. I didn't know about you, Rosie. If I had, I would have done everything to help you. Rosie's lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked away, her small fingers tracing the heart-shaped pendant. Mom said you were rich. Why didn't you come find us? William's throat tightened. He wanted to explain, to pour out every regret and failure, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. I'm here now, he said finally, and I want to help you. Please let me. Rosie didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the necklace. The silence stretched between them until Martha stepped forward. That's enough for now, she said gently. Rosie needs time. William nodded, standing slowly. I'll come back, he said to Rosie, his voice low. You're not alone anymore. As he left the community center, his chest felt heavy, but for the first time in years, there was a spark of something else, hope. The days following William's first meeting with Rosie were unlike any he had experienced before. For years, his life had been meticulously controlled, a predictable pattern of work, wealth, and isolation. Now, his thoughts were consumed by a little girl who barely trusted him, a stranger who carried pieces of his past he couldn't ignore. He returned to the community center the next day, determined to make progress. Martha greeted him at the door with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She hasn't stopped talking about you, Martha said. But don't take that as a sign she's ready to forgive. William nodded, appreciating her candor. I just want to see her. Rosie was sitting in the corner of the playroom again, this time flipping through a battered book with a tattered spine. She glanced up when he entered, her small frame stiffening as their eyes met. You're back, she said, her tone neutral but edged with wariness. I told you I would be, William replied, keeping his voice even. He approached her slowly, careful not to invade her space. What are you reading? Rosie held up the book, the cover faded and barely legible. It's about a princess. Mom used to read it to me. William sat down a few feet away from her, folding his hands on his lap. Emily loved stories when she was your age. I used to read to her every night. Rosie eyed him carefully, as if deciding whether to believe him. What kind of stories? Fairy tales, mostly, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Her favorite was about a little girl who saved her village by outsmarting a giant. Rosie's face softened, just for a moment. Mom liked stories where the little guy won. William nodded, his heart aching at the thought of Emily. She was a lot like that, strong and smart. She always stood up for what she believed in. For the first time, Rosie didn't look away. Mom said you didn't listen to her. The words stung, but William didn't flinch. She was right, he admitted. I made a lot of mistakes. I thought I knew what was best for her, and I didn't realize how much I was hurting her until it was too late. Rosie was quiet, her fingers brushing the edge of the book. She said you were mad at her when she left. I was, William said, his voice tinged with regret, but not for the reasons she thought. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things between us, so I let my anger take over. It's something I'll always regret. Rosie's small shoulders sagged, as if the weight of his words had settled over her. She never stopped loving you, she said quietly. She told me that. William's chest tightened. Hearing those words from Rosie felt like a bomb and a wound all at once. I never stopped loving her either, he said, and I want to make things right for her and for you. Rosie looked at him for a long moment, her young face etched with an expression far older than her years. Finally, she nodded, though it was hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely convinced but was willing to let him try. The days that followed became a delicate dance. William visited Rosie every afternoon, bringing small gifts, a warm coat, a set of colored pencils, a box of her favorite snacks. At first, she accepted them reluctantly, as if unsure whether they came with strings attached. But gradually, her wariness began to fade. One snowy afternoon, William brought her a small music box. It was intricately crafted, with tiny figures of a ballerina and a piano that twirled when the lid was opened. Rosie's eyes lit up when she saw it, her fingers brushing over the polished wood. It's beautiful, she whispered, cranking the key to hear the soft melody. Emily loved music, William said. She used to play the piano every chance she got. She wanted to be a musician. Rosie's gaze flicked to him. Mom taught me to play a little, she said shyly. We didn't have a real piano, just a keyboard someone gave us. But she said I was good. William smiled, his chest swelling with pride. I'd like to hear you play someday. Rosie's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it quickly faded. Mom said you were busy all the time, that you didn't have time for her. The words were a knife to his heart. He swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. She was right, he said. I was too focused on my work. I thought providing for her was enough, but I was wrong. I see that now, and I want to do better. I want to be here for you. Rosie studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she reached out and turned the key on the music box again, letting the melody fill the air. It wasn't an acceptance, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was a start. Martha observed their growing bond from a distance, her sharp gaze softening as she saw Rosie slowly open up. One evening, as William was preparing to leave, she pulled him aside. You're making progress, she said, her tone cautious but not unkind. But Rosie's been through a lot. It's going to take time for her to trust you completely. I'm willing to wait, William said firmly. As long as it takes. Martha nodded, her respect for him growing despite herself. Good. Because that little girl deserves someone who won't give up on her. As William stepped out into the snowy evening, he felt something he hadn't in years, a sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many scars to heal. But for the first time, he believed he could do it. Rosie was his second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Winter tightened its grip on the city as weeks passed. But inside the walls of the community center, a tentative warmth began to grow between William and Rosie. Though their relationship was still fragile, moments of connection became more frequent. William learned to be patient, to let Rosie set the pace, and to meet her on her terms. One chilly afternoon, William arrived at the center with a large paper bag. Inside were ingredients for a simple dinner: fresh vegetables, a loaf of crusty bread, and a package of chicken. He found Rosie sitting at one of the tables, drawing with the colored pencils he'd given her. "What's that?" she asked, peeking into the bag. "I thought we could cook dinner together," William said, setting the bag on the table. "Do you like chicken soup?" Rosie tilted her head, skeptical. "You know how to cook?" William chuckled. "I'm not completely helpless. Your grandmother, my wife, used to say I made a decent soup. Want to help?" Rosie hesitated, then nodded. Together, they made their way to the kitchen, where Martha handed William an apron with a smirk. "Let's see what you've got," she said, stepping aside to let them work. William carefully guided Rosie through each step, showing her how to chop vegetables safely and measure out spices. She watched intently, her small hands mimicking his movements. As the pot began to simmer, the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of the soup, and Rosie's stiff demeanor seemed to soften. "Mom used to make soup when we didn't have much," Rosie said quietly, stirring the pot. "She'd call it magic soup because she said it could make anything better." William smiled, his chest tightening at the thought of Emily. She was right. Soup has a way of warming you from the inside out. Rosie looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You talk about her like you knew her so well, but she told me you weren't there." The word stung, but William didn't flinch. "She's right, Rosie. I wasn't there as much as I should have been. I thought providing for her, giving her a big house, the best education, was enough. But I didn't see what she really needed until it was too late." Rosie frowned, stirring the soup absently. "What did she need?" "Me," William said simply. "She needed me to listen, to be there for her when it mattered. And I didn't do that. I can't change the past, but I want to do better now. I want to be here for you." Rosie didn't respond immediately, but her hands stilled on the spoon. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the gentle bubbling of the soup. Then she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think she'd forgive you?" Rosie asked softly. William's throat tightened. "I don't know. I hope so." Dinner that night was simple but meaningful. Rosie proudly ladled the soup into bowls, and William made a show of praising her cooking skills. Martha joined them at the table, her sharp wit keeping the conversation light when it threatened to dip into heavier territory. For the first time in years, William felt something akin to home, a sense of belonging that had long eluded him. After dinner, as the dishes were being cleared, Rosie tugged on William's sleeve. "Can we go for a walk?" she asked. Surprised but pleased, William nodded. They bundled up against the cold and stepped outside into the crisp night air. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked along the quiet streets, the city's lights casting a soft glow over the freshly fallen snow. Rosie led the way, her small hand tucked into William's. She didn't say much at first, but her steps were purposeful, as though she had a destination in mind. Finally, they arrived at a small park, its swings and slides dusted with snow. Rosie let go of his hand and walked over to a bench, brushing off the snow before sitting down. William joined her, waiting for her to speak. "This was Mom's favorite park," Rosie said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "We used to come here when things got really hard. She'd sit right here and tell me stories about when she was little." William looked around, taking in the quiet beauty of the park. He could almost picture Emily here, her laughter echoing through the air as she pushed Rosie on the swings. "She must have been a wonderful mom," he said. "She was," Rosie said firmly. Then, after a pause, she added, "But she missed you." She never said it, but I could tell. Whenever she talked about her dad, her voice got all soft. William's heart ached. "I missed her too, Rosie. More than I can ever say." Rosie looked at him, her young face serious. "If she were here, she'd probably tell me to give you a chance." William swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that. I'd like a chance to be your family." Rosie didn't reply immediately, but after a moment, she leaned against him, her small head resting on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. William wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as they sat together in the quiet park. For the first time in years, William felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that he could build something new, something meaningful, with the little girl who had brought light back into his life. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as he held Rosie close, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let her down. Not this time. The days turned into weeks, and winter's icy grip began to loosen as William and Rosie found their rhythm. Their bond grew slowly but surely, marked by shared moments and tentative trust. William visited the community center daily, learning more about Rosie's life and piecing together fragments of Emily's story. He came to treasure these afternoons, finding a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. One morning, while sipping coffee in his office, William received an unexpected call from Martha. Her tone was calm but carried an undercurrent of concern. She explained that Rosie had been feeling unusually tired and had fainted during breakfast. Alarmed, William insisted on taking Rosie to a doctor. Though hesitant, Martha agreed, understanding that William had grown genuinely invested in Rosie's well-being. The appointment was scheduled for the next day, and William personally drove Rosie to the clinic. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, her usual spark dimmed. William tried to keep the mood light, pointing out interesting landmarks and sharing stories about Emily. Rosie smiled faintly but didn't say much. At the clinic, the doctor, a kind woman with silver hair and a reassuring demeanor, performed a thorough examination. She asked Rosie a series of questions while William sat nearby, his worry evident. Blood tests were ordered, and the doctor assured them they'd have answers soon. William thanked her and took Rosie out for ice cream afterward, despite the chill in the air. As they sat on a park bench, Rosie licked her cone thoughtfully. "Do you think something's wrong with me?" she asked, her voice small. William hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I think you've been through a lot, Rosie. Sometimes, when we've had a tough time, our bodies need a little extra care to get strong again." Rosie nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Mom used to say I was tough. She said I could handle anything." William smiled, his chest tightening. "She was right. You're one of the toughest people I've ever met." Rosie glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" William reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know she would be. She loved you more than anything, Rosie." A week later, the doctor called with the results. William was in his study when the phone rang, and he answered it immediately. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. Rosie had a serious blood disorder, likely inherited, and would need specialized treatment. A bone marrow transplant was her best chance for recovery, but finding a compatible donor could take time. William sat in stunned silence as the doctor explained the next steps. The thought of Rosie suffering, of losing her, was unbearable. He thanked the doctor. His voice steady despite the turmoil inside, and hung up. For a moment, he sat there, staring at the phone. Then, with a resolve he hadn't felt in years, he made a decision. That evening, William met with Martha at the community center. She listened quietly as he explained Rosie's condition and the treatment plan, her face lined with worry. When he finished, she placed a comforting hand on his arm. "She's strong, William," Martha said. "And she has you now. That's going to make all the difference." "I'll do whatever it takes," William said firmly. "She's not going through this alone." Rosie was quieter than usual when William explained the situation to her. She listened intently, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. When he finished, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "Some parts might," William admitted, his voice gentle. "But I'll be with you every step of the way." "You're not facing this alone, Rosie." She nodded slowly, her face serious. "Okay, I want to get better." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's visits, tests, and consultations. William threw himself into the process, using every resource at his disposal to ensure Rosie received the best care. He even had himself tested as a potential donor, hoping against hope that he might be a match. When the results came back, he was both relieved and terrified. He was a match. The news brought a strange mixture of emotions. On one hand, he was grateful to be able to help Rosie directly. On the other, the weight of responsibility was immense. He knew the procedure carried risks, but he didn't hesitate for a moment. He would do whatever it took to give Rosie a chance at a healthy, happy life. As the day of the transplant approached, Rosie grew more subdued. William noticed her withdrawing, spending long hours drawing in her notebook or staring out the window. One evening, as they sat together in the hospital waiting room, he decided to ask her about it. "Rosie," he began, his voice gentle, "are you scared?" She looked at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly, I'm scared that if this doesn't work, you won't want me anymore." The words hit him like a blow. He leaned forward, taking her small hands in his. "Rosie, listen to me. No matter what happens, I will always want you. You're my family and I love you." Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, squeezing his hands tightly. "I love you too, Grandpa." The day of the procedure arrived, and William found himself more nervous than he'd ever been in his life. As he lay on the hospital bed, preparing for the bone marrow extraction, his thoughts were consumed by Rosie. He pictured her smile, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her mother. He had already lost Emily. He couldn't bear to lose Rosie too. The procedure went smoothly, and the doctors assured him that everything was on track. Rosie received the transplant later that day, and the following weeks were a waiting game as her body adjusted. William stayed by her side through it all, reading to her, playing games, and sharing stories about Emily. Slowly but surely, Rosie began to recover. Her strength returned, and her laughter filled the room once more. William watched her progress with a mixture of relief and pride, grateful for the second chance he'd been given. One evening, as they sat together in the hospital, Rosie leaned against him, her voice soft. "Do you think Mom knows we're okay?" William smiled, his heart full. "I think she does. And I think she's very proud of you." Rosie looked up at him, her eyes bright. "And you?" He kissed the top of her head, his voice thick with emotion. "I hope so, Rosie. I really hope so." For the first time in years, William felt whole. Rosie wasn't just his second chance. She was his redemption, his reason to keep moving forward. Together, they would build a future, one filled with love, hope, and the memory of the woman who had brought them together. As spring began to bloom, the once frigid days gave way to warmer breezes and budding flowers, mirroring the progress Rosie made in her recovery. Each week brought small victories. Her energy returned, her laughter became more frequent, and her appetite grew. William spent as much time as possible by her side, marveling at her resilience and spirit. For the first time in years, his mansion felt like a home, filled with a sense of warmth and belonging he had long forgotten. One day, as Rosie sat in the garden sketching flowers, she looked up at William, her face serious. "Grandpa, can we visit Mom?" The question caught him off guard. Though he had pieced together much of Emily's story, he hadn't yet mustered the courage to visit her final resting place. It felt like an acknowledgement of his failures, a confrontation with the guilt that still lingered in his heart. But Rosie's eyes held a determination he couldn't deny, and he knew it was a step they needed to take together. "Of course," he said, his voice steady. "We'll go tomorrow." The following morning, they drove to a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Rosie held tightly to his hand as they walked among the headstones, the air heavy with quiet reverence. When they reached Emily's grave, Rosie knelt down, tracing the engraved letters of her mother's name with her fingertips. "Hi, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I miss you." William stood silently, his chest tight as he watched Rosie speak to the headstone. Her words were simple but heartfelt, a child's attempt to bridge the distance between the living and the departed. When she fell quiet, she turned to him, her eyes glistening with tears. "Do you want to say something?" she asked. William swallowed hard, stepping closer. For a moment, he struggled to find the right words, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Finally, he knelt beside Rosie, his voice low but firm. "Emily," he began, "I don't know if I can ever make up for the time we lost. I made so many mistakes, and I'm sorry for every one of them. But I want you to know how proud I am of you, of the incredible woman and mother you became. Rosie is everything I could have hoped for, and I see so much of you in her." He paused, his hand resting gently on the headstone. "I promise you, I'll take care of her. I'll be the father and grandfather I should have been all along. I hope you can forgive me." The words hung in the air, a mixture of regret and resolve. Rosie leaned against him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Together, they sat in silence, the weight of their shared grief lightened by the strength of their bond. Afterward, they returned to the mansion, where Rosie seemed to find new energy. She spent hours drawing, her sketches growing more detailed and vibrant. William watched her with pride, marveling at her talent and determination. It wasn't long before she came to him with an idea. "Grandpa," she said one evening, holding up a drawing of the mansion, "what if we turn this into a place for kids like me? Kids who don't have families?" The suggestion took him by surprise. He looked at her, his brow furrowing. "You want to turn the mansion into a home for other children?" Rosie nodded, her eyes bright. "Mom always said it's important to help people, and you have so much space. We could make it a really nice place, with rooms for everyone and a big garden and everything." William considered her words, his mind racing. The mansion, with its endless halls and unused rooms, had always been a symbol of his wealth and isolation. But Rosie's vision transformed it into something entirely different, a place of hope and community. The idea resonated deeply, aligning with the sense of purpose he had discovered through her. "That's a wonderful idea," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Let's make it happen." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. William hired architects, contractors, and designers to reimagine the mansion as a haven for children in need. Rosie was involved in every step, her enthusiasm infectious. She picked out colors for the walls, designed play areas, and even helped plan a music room in honor of her mother's love for piano. As the project progressed, William reached out to Martha, asking her to help oversee the center. Her experience and dedication made her the perfect choice, and she accepted without hesitation, though not without a sharp quip about him finally doing something worthwhile with his money. The grand opening of the Harrington home was a day filled with joy and emotion. Families, community members, and local officials gathered to celebrate the transformation of the once closed-off mansion into a sanctuary for children. Rosie stood proudly by William's side as he gave a short speech, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "This home is a tribute to my daughter, Emily," he said. Her kindness, strength, and love live on through her daughter, Rosie, who inspired this vision. My hope is that this place will give children the support and opportunities they deserve, just as Emily would have wanted. The crowd erupted in applause, and William felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had ever experienced. Rosie beamed up at him, her hand slipping into his. "Mom would be so proud," she said softly. As the months passed, the Harrington home flourished. Children of all ages filled its halls with laughter and life, each finding a sense of belonging within its walls. Rosie became a beloved figure among them, her warmth and creativity inspiring those around her. William immersed himself in the day-to-day operations, forging connections with the children and staff that deepened his sense of purpose. One evening, as they sat together in the music room, Rosie played a simple melody on the piano, her fingers gliding over the keys with a grace that reminded William of Emily. When she finished, she turned to him, her face glowing with happiness. "Grandpa," she said, "I think we're doing something really special." William nodded, his heart full. "We are, Rosie. And it's all because of you." She grinned, leaning her head against his arm. "It's because of us. We're a team." As the sun set over the Harrington home, its golden light streaming through the windows, William felt a profound sense of peace. He had found his way back to what truly mattered: love, family, and the legacy of a daughter who had taught him the meaning of both. Rosie was not just his second chance. She was his greatest gift, and together, they had built a future filled with hope and possibility. Life at the Harrington home settled into a joyful rhythm. The once quiet mansion was alive with the sounds of children laughing, playing, and learning. Each room brimmed with warmth, color, and energy, transforming the grand estate into a sanctuary that reflected Rosie's vibrant spirit and William's newfound purpose. The children, many of whom had known hardship and uncertainty, began to thrive in the loving and supportive environment. Rosie flourished too. Her recovery was steady, her strength growing with each passing day. She took on a leadership role among the children, helping newcomers adjust and planning activities that brought everyone together. Whether organizing an art project or teaching younger kids how to play the piano, she radiated the compassion and resilience that had carried her through so much. For William, seeing her grow into such a remarkable young girl was nothing short of miraculous. One rainy afternoon, William and Rosie were sitting in the library, surrounded by books and the comforting patter of raindrops against the windows. Rosie was reading a novel while William worked on paperwork for the home, a quiet but companionable silence between them. Suddenly, Rosie closed her book and looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Grandpa," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness, "do you ever think about what it was like when Mom was my age?" William put down his pen, his focus shifting entirely to her. "All the time," he admitted. "She was full of life, just like you. Always curious, always dreaming. She used to climb that tree in the backyard, the big one with the swing, and sit there for hours pretending she was a pirate." Rosie giggled. "A pirate? Mom?" "Oh, yes," William said with a chuckle. "She'd make up stories about treasure maps and adventures at sea. She had an imagination that could rival anyone's." Rosie leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Did she ever tell you about her dreams? What she wanted to be when she grew up?" William hesitated, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. "She wanted to be a musician," he said. "She loved the piano more than anything. When she was about your age, she told me she was going to play in big concert halls one day and travel the world." Rosie's smile faltered slightly. "Why didn't she?" William sighed, the weight of the past pressing down on him. "I didn't listen, Rosie. I pushed her to follow a path I thought was best for her. School, business, things I thought would give her a secure future. I didn't understand how important music was to her until it was too late." Rosie reached out, placing her small hand on his. "But she taught me to love music," she said softly. "So, in a way, she's still playing." William's throat tightened, emotion welling up in him. "She is, Rosie. Through you." Their conversation lingered in his mind long after Rosie returned to her book. That evening, as he wandered the quiet halls of the home, he found himself drawn to the music room. The grand piano stood at the center, its polished surface gleaming under the soft light. William sat down, running his fingers over the keys, and played a few tentative notes. It had been years since he'd touched a piano, but the familiar sound stirred something deep within him. The next day, inspired by their conversation, William approached Rosie with an idea. "How would you feel about putting on a concert here, at the home?" he asked. Rosie's eyes widened. "A concert? Me? You and anyone else who wants to join," William said. "We could invite everyone, families, friends, people from the community. It would be a chance to celebrate everything we've built here." Rosie's initial shock gave way to excitement. "That sounds amazing, but what if I mess up?" "You won't," William said firmly. "And even if you do, it won't matter. Everyone will be there to support you." Rosie beamed, throwing her arms around him. "Let's do it." Planning the concert became a family affair, involving everyone at the Harrington home. The children eagerly signed up to perform, showcasing a variety of talents, from singing and dancing to playing instruments. Rosie took charge of the program, carefully organizing the lineup and practicing her piano piece every day. William helped with the logistics, ensuring the event would be nothing short of spectacular. On the night of the concert, the mansion's grand hall was transformed into a festive venue. Strings of twinkling lights adorned the walls, and rows of chairs were arranged facing a small stage. Guests began to arrive, filling the room with chatter and anticipation. William, dressed in a sharp suit, greeted them warmly, his pride evident as he introduced them to the home and its mission. When it was time for the performances, Rosie stood backstage, nervously adjusting the hem of her dress. William knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be wonderful," he said. "Just remember, this isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something you love with people who care about you." Rosie nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay, I'll try." The concert began with a lively dance routine, followed by a heartfelt solo from a young girl who had recently joined the home. Each act was met with thunderous applause, the audience's enthusiasm creating an atmosphere of pure joy. Finally, it was Rosie's turn. As she walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She sat at the piano, her small frame dwarfed by the grand instrument, and adjusted the sheet music in front of her. For a moment, she hesitated, her hands hovering over the keys. Then, with a deep breath, she began to play. The melody was simple but beautiful, each note resonating with emotion. William watched from the audience, his heart swelling with pride. He could see Emily and Rosie's every movement, the way her fingers danced across the keys with quiet confidence. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, and Rosie's face lit up with a radiant smile. After the concert, guests mingled in the hall, praising the performances and marveling at the transformation of the mansion. Rosie was surrounded by a group of children, her excitement contagious as she recounted the experience. William stood to the side, observing the scene with a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. Martha approached him, her expression warm. "You've done something incredible here," she said. "Emily would be proud." He nodded, his gaze fixed on Rosie. "She's the one who inspires me every day." As the evening wound down, Rosie found William and threw her arms around him. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. William hugged her tightly, his voice filled with emotion. "Always, Rosie. Always." That night, as the mansion grew quiet once more, William sat in the music room, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt whole. The Harrington home wasn't just a place. It was a testament to love, resilience, and the enduring power of family. And in the center of it all was Rosie, his greatest gift and his guiding light. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a legacy that would continue to grow for years to come. As the summer months settled in, life at the Harrington home blossomed into a vibrant symphony of activity. The garden, once a manicured but sterile expanse of grass, had been transformed into a lively haven with colorful flowers, vegetable patches, and a playground bustling with energy. Children chased each other through the paths, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze, while Rosie often sat beneath the large oak tree sketching scenes of their joyful world. For William, these days were a revelation. He found himself deeply immersed in the lives of the children, learning their names, their stories, and their dreams. Each child reminded him in some way of Emily, a poignant reminder of the compassion and determination she had instilled in him through her absence. Yet, the most profound moments always revolved around Rosie, whose strength and spirit continually amazed him. One quiet afternoon, William and Rosie sat together on a bench overlooking the garden. Rosie was meticulously coloring a drawing of the mansion, complete with the children she had come to consider her extended family. William watched her work, a soft smile on his face. "Do you ever miss how the house used to be?" Rosie asked suddenly, glancing up at him. William considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "I used to think the mansion was perfect the way it was," he admitted. "But looking back, it was just a shell. It was big, beautiful, and empty. Now, it's alive. It's everything I didn't know I needed." Rosie nodded, returning to her drawing. "Mom used to say that love makes a house a home." "She was right," William said, his voice tinged with emotion. "She had a way of seeing what really mattered." Rosie set her drawing aside, looking up at him with a serious expression. "Do you ever wonder if she can see us? If she knows what we've done here?" William felt his throat tighten, the weight of her question settling in his chest. "I think about that every day," he said honestly, "and I like to believe she does. I think she'd be proud of you, Rosie. Proud of everything you've done to make this place so special." Rosie leaned against him, her small hand slipping into his. "I think she'd be proud of you too, Grandpa." The warmth of her words filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. They sat together in comfortable silence, the sounds of children playing in the background, a testament to the life they had built together. As the summer stretched on, William began to notice subtle changes in Rosie. Though her energy and enthusiasm remained, there were moments when she seemed distant, her thoughts wandering. He chalked it up to her growing maturity, the natural introspection of a child becoming aware of the world around her. Still, a part of him worried, the shadow of her past health challenges lingering in the back of his mind. One evening, as they sat together in the library, Rosie brought up a topic that had been weighing on her mind. She looked up from her book, her expression thoughtful. "Grandpa, do you ever think about Mom's dreams?" "Every day," William said, setting aside his paperwork. "Why do you ask?" "I've been thinking about what she wanted to do, being a musician, traveling the world," Rosie said. "And I want to do something like that. Not music, exactly, but something big, something that would make her proud." William leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you have in mind?" Rosie hesitated, then reached for her sketchbook, flipping to a page filled with intricate drawings of houses, playgrounds, and gardens. "I want to build places like this," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "Homes for kids who don't have families. Places where they can feel safe and loved." William's heart swelled with pride as he studied her sketches. "That's an incredible dream, Rosie, and I think it's something Emily would be very proud of." Rosie smiled, her cheeks tinged with pink. "Do you really think I can do it?" "I know you can," William said firmly, "and I'll be here to help you every step of the way." Their conversation sparked a new wave of enthusiasm for Rosie, who began dedicating her free time to planning her vision. She pored over books about architecture and design, sought advice from Martha and the staff, and even joined William in meetings with local charities to learn about fundraising and community support. Her determination was infectious, inspiring everyone around her to rally behind her dream. One afternoon, as Rosie presented her latest sketches to a group of staff and volunteers, William couldn't help but marvel at her confidence and poise. She spoke with the passion and clarity of someone far beyond her years, her vision shining through in every word. When the meeting concluded, Martha approached William, her expression warm. "She's remarkable," she said. "You should be very proud." "I am," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's taught me more about life and love than I ever thought possible." Martha nodded, her eyes twinkling. "She's a lot like her mother, you know? Fierce, determined, and full of heart. As the days turned into weeks, Rosie's vision began to take shape. With William's support, she launched a small initiative within the Harrington home, creating a mentorship program that paired older children with younger ones. The program quickly became a cornerstone of the home's culture, fostering bonds and providing a sense of purpose for everyone involved. One evening, as William watched the children interact during a group activity, Rosie approached him, her face glowing with excitement. "Grandpa, I think we're ready to start planning the first new home." William smiled, his pride evident. "Then let's get started." Together, they began laying the groundwork for a second Harrington home, reaching out to architects, donors, and community leaders to turn Rosie's dream into reality. The process was challenging, requiring patience and perseverance, but Rosie tackled each obstacle with the same determination that had carried her through her own trials. By the end of the summer, the plans were finalized and construction on the second home was set to begin. Rosie stood proudly at the groundbreaking ceremony, a shovel in her hands and a smile on her face as she posed for photos with the children who would one day call the new home their own. As William watched her, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Rosie had not only embraced her mother's legacy but had built upon it, creating a future filled with hope and possibility. Through her, he had found redemption, love, and a purpose that extended far beyond himself. That evening, as they sat together in the garden, Rosie turned to him, her eyes shining with happiness. "Grandpa, do you think Mom would be happy with what we've done?" William smiled, his voice steady and filled with certainty. "I think she'd be more than happy, Rosie. I think she'd be proud beyond words." Rosie leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I hope so. I want her to know how much I love her. And you?" William wrapped his arm around her, his heart full. "She knows, Rosie. She always has. And so do I." As the stars began to twinkle overhead, the two of them sat in comfortable silence, the future stretching before them like a blank canvas, ready to be painted with love, hope, and the enduring legacy of the Harrington family. Autumn brought a crisp chill to the air, and the golden leaves that blanketed the grounds of the Harrington home added a new kind of beauty to its transformation. The home had become a beacon of hope, a place that not only offered children safety but gave them the tools to dream and grow. For William, watching Rosie thrive in this environment was his greatest joy. She was the heart of everything, her passion and creativity inspiring everyone around her. One evening, as twilight settled over the mansion, William found Rosie in the study, poring over blueprints for the new home they were building. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she made notes in the margins, occasionally erasing and redrawing lines with a precision that belied her age. William leaned against the doorway, quietly admiring her determination before stepping inside. "You've been at this for hours," he said gently. "Don't you think it's time for a break?" Rosie looked up, startled, but then smiled. "I'm almost done," she said, holding up the blueprints. "I'm trying to figure out where the garden should go. It needs to get lots of sunlight." William moved closer, looking over her shoulder. "The garden's important to you, isn't it?" She nodded, her voice thoughtful. "It was always Mom's favorite place. When we didn't have much, she'd say that gardens were proof you could grow something beautiful out of almost nothing. I want every kid who lives here to have a place like that." William felt a familiar ache in his chest, a bittersweet blend of pride and sorrow. "She would love this, Rosie. You've captured exactly what she believed in." Rosie's face lit up, but then she hesitated, her expression turning serious. "Do you ever wish she was here? Like, really here?" "Every day," William said without hesitation. "I wish I could tell her how proud I am of her, and of you. I wish she could see what you're doing and how much good you've brought into the world." Rosie lowered her gaze to the blueprints, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "Sometimes I feel like I can almost hear her, like she's telling me to keep going." William reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Maybe she is, and maybe she's guiding us in ways we can't see." Rosie looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Do you think that's true?" "I do," William said, his voice steady. "I think love like hers doesn't just disappear. It stays with us, in the choices we make and the lives we touch. They worked side by side for the rest of the evening, their bond deepening with every shared moment. For William, this time with Rosie was more than a second chance. It was a gift, a chance to rewrite his legacy and leave behind something truly meaningful. As the weeks passed, the second Harrington home began to take shape. Rosie's involvement in the project continued to grow, and her confidence blossomed with each new accomplishment. The children at the original home adored her, often calling her Little Miss Boss in playful admiration. She took the nickname in stride, her laughter echoing through the halls whenever it was used. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, William and Rosie were approached by Martha, who carried a thick envelope in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. "This came for you, Rosie," Martha said, handing her the envelope. "It's from the local community foundation." Rosie's eyes widened as she took the envelope, carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a formal letter, accompanied by a certificate. As she read, her face lit up with astonishment and joy. "They're giving us a grant," she exclaimed, holding the letter up for William to see. "It's for the new home. They said they were inspired by what we've done here." William took the letter, reading it quickly. The foundation had awarded them a substantial grant to help fund the construction of the second home, praising Rosie's vision and leadership in their decision. "You've done it," William said, his voice filled with pride. "This is because of you, Rosie." Rosie threw her arms around him, her excitement bubbling over. "We did it," she said firmly. "All of us." The grant was a turning point, accelerating the progress on the new home and drawing even more attention to their work. Local media picked up the story, featuring Rosie and William in interviews that highlighted the transformation of the Harrington estate and the impact it had on the community. Rosie handled the attention with grace, her genuine passion shining through every time she spoke. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and planning, William and Rosie sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that demanded reflection. "Grandpa," Rosie said, her voice soft, "do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Mom hadn't left?" William thought for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fading light. "I used to," he admitted. "For a long time, I thought about all the things I should have done differently, all the ways I could have been a better father. But now I think about what she gave me instead." Rosie tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "She gave me you," William said, his voice steady. "And through you, I found a purpose I never thought I'd have. You've shown me that it's never too late to change, to make a difference." Rosie smiled, her eyes filled with affection. "You've changed too, Grandpa. A lot. Mom would be really proud of you." William placed an arm around her, pulling her close. "Thank you, Rosie, for everything." As the stars began to dot the sky, they sat together in peaceful silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. William no longer dwelled on the mistakes of his past. Instead, he looked forward to the future they were building together, a future filled with hope, love, and the enduring legacy of Emily's spirit. The second Harrington home would soon open its doors, a testament to Rosie's vision and the unwavering support of her grandfather. And as William watched the stars twinkle above, he felt an unshakable sense of gratitude for Rosie, for Emily, and for the chance to create something beautiful out of the pain that had once consumed him. The grand opening of the second Harrington home was a day of celebration and reflection. The sun shone brightly over the new facility, a beautiful structure surrounded by gardens Rosie had meticulously planned. Families, local leaders, and supporters gathered to honor the project, filling the air with excitement and pride. Rosie stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a mixture of humility and joy. Dressed in a pale blue dress that brought out her sparkling eyes, she carried herself with a poise that made William's heart swell. She was the embodiment of everything good in the world, a living testament to resilience and love. As she guided visitors through the home, explaining its features and her vision, William stayed close, marveling at how much she had grown. When it was time for the ceremony, the crowd gathered on the lawn before a small stage adorned with flowers. William took his place beside Rosie, his hand resting on her shoulder as they waited for the speeches to begin. Martha spoke first, sharing her perspective on the transformation she had witnessed over the past year. Her words were filled with warmth and gratitude, setting the tone for the day. Finally, it was Rosie's turn. She stepped forward, her small hands gripping the edges of the podium. There was a moment of silence as she scanned the crowd, her expression thoughtful. Then, in a steady voice, she began to speak. "This home isn't just a building," she said. "It's a promise. A promise that no child should ever feel alone or unwanted. It's a place where love grows, where dreams can come true, and where people can find hope even when they think all is lost." Her words carried an emotional weight that silenced the crowd. "When my mom and I didn't have much, she always told me to look for the good in the world, even when it was hard to see. She believed in making things better, even when it felt impossible. That's what this home is about, taking the hard things and turning them into something beautiful." William felt tears welling up in his eyes as he listened. Rosie spoke with a passion and wisdom far beyond her years, channeling her mother's spirit in every word. "I want to thank my grandpa," Rosie continued, her voice softening as she turned to him. "He believed in me when I wasn't sure I could do this. He gave me the courage to dream big and to keep going, no matter what. This home is as much his as it is mine." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "Mom would be proud of you, Grandpa." "I know she would." The crowd erupted into applause, and Rosie stepped back into William's arms. He hugged her tightly, his heart full. "You've made me prouder than I could ever say," he whispered. After the ceremony, the guests mingled, exploring the home and enjoying the festivities. Music played softly in the background, and tables were set up with food and drinks. Rosie moved through the crowd, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with the children who would soon live in the new home. She was in her element, a natural leader who radiated kindness and strength. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the celebration, William found himself standing by the garden Rosie had designed. He gazed at the vibrant flowers and neatly arranged pathways, his thoughts drifting to Emily. He could almost hear her voice, feel her presence in the gentle rustle of the leaves. "She'd be so proud of you, you know," Martha said, appearing at his side. Her tone was warm but firm, as though willing him to believe it. William nodded, his throat tight. "I hope so." This was all for her, and for Rosie. Martha smiled. "You've done more than build homes, William. You've built a family." That's something she always wanted. As the evening turned to night, the crowd began to thin, and the atmosphere grew quieter. Rosie joined William in the garden, her steps light as she approached. She looked up at him with a contented smile, slipping her hand into his. "Do you think she knows?" Rosie asked, her voice soft. "I do," William said, his gaze fixed on the stars above. "I think she's watching over us, and I think she's proud of everything you've done." Rosie leaned against him, her small frame warm and steady. "I'm proud of us too," she said. "We've come so far, haven't we?" William wrapped an arm around her, his heart full. "We have, and it's just the beginning." The two of them stood in the garden, the distant sounds of laughter and music fading into the background. For William, the moment was perfect, a culmination of all the pain, love, and hope that had brought them to this point. He had found redemption in Rosie, a chance to honor Emily's memory by building something beautiful and lasting. As the stars glittered above, William felt a profound sense of peace. The Harrington home was more than just a place. It was a legacy of love, a beacon of hope, and a reminder that even the deepest wounds could be healed with kindness and connection. And in the center of it all was Rosie, his light, his purpose, and his greatest gift. Together, they walked back toward the house, the future stretching out before them like an open road. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond unbreakable, their love enduring. And in every step they took, they carried Emily with them, a guiding star that would never fade. How far would you go to make things right with someone you love? This heartwarming story reminds us that it's never too late to heal, to love, and to start over. If this touched your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and reflect on your own journey. And be sure to check out the next videos on the channel. You won't want to miss the inspiring stories we have coming up.